Hello and welcome. I'm Nadira Tudor and you're watching W News. Broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters, these are our top stories. Donald Trump's latest White House appointment sends shockwaves through Washington as controversial Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is chosen as Attorney General. British Defence Secretary John Healey travels to Turkey and Saudi Arabia to discuss ceasefire possibilities in the Middle East. And Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly proposed a Lebanon ceasefire deal in January as a so-called gift to Donald Trump. We start with the United States, and President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet is taking shape and making headlines stateside following a series of controversial picks for senior positions. In assembling his team for a second term, Trump is sticking with loyalists but faces a potential backlash from his own lawmakers, as Benji Haya reports.
The 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
If you thought Donald Trump might conform to the Washington playbook, then think again. After a series of more traditional cabinet selections, he's reverted to the unconventional, nominating Tulsi Gabbard as his Director of National Intelligence. The former Democratic Party Congresswoman has expressed sympathetic views on Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and Russia's leader Vladimir Putin. So much so that she's been described on Russian TV as an agent of Moscow.
The Tulsi Gabbard appointment really casts a very negative light on everything else. Because how can you have someone who has shown herself to be so irresponsible from a national security point of view, sitting in the Situation Room during a National Security Council meeting, which is where she will be, and think that you're going to get a positive results out of that? I mean, that to me is extraordinarily concerning.
Gaetz.
Then there's this man.
Donald John Trump.
Matt Gaetz. Trump wants him to be Attorney General in charge of America's justice system. A fierce ally of the former president, he's stood by him during his criminal trials.
This is a made-up crime. No other American in the country would be charged with this type of crime. It's like the Mr. Potato Head doll of crimes, where they had to stick together a bunch of things that did not belong together.
As Attorney General, Gaetz would have the power and will to shut down Trump's remaining criminal cases, consigning them to the ash heap of history. But he's faced his own legal challenges too, as the subject of a congressional ethics investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct, illicit drug use and misuse of campaign funds. By resigning from Congress yesterday, he may have prevented the release of any findings. Yet his bombastic approach means he has no shortage of enemies on Capitol Hill, including within his own party. It means getting approved by the Senate is a tall order, even if Republicans control that chamber, as well as, it was confirmed on Wednesday, the House of Representatives, granting Trump the much-coveted trifecta, command of all branches of government to enact his MAGA agenda unencumbered.
Republicans in the House and Senate have a mandate. It's true. It was a decisive win across the nation. The American people want us to implement and deliver that America First agenda. And we have to do that while we have that energy and that excitement beginning on the very first day of the Congress in the new year.
At the White House transition yesterday, something he denied President Joe Biden last time, Donald Trump said politics is tough and not a very nice world. A message perhaps to those who try to stand in his way. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
For more analysis, let's speak to our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, in Washington now. Simon, you've obviously been following the US president-elect very closely. Trump's latest move has tapped Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Why has he been chosen for this role, as it's a pretty controversial appointment, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is, Nadira. I mean, it has been a very long while in this city since both sides of the political divide up on Capitol Hill, Republican and Democrats, have gathered together for a good old laugh. And they really have been doing that over the last 24 hours since the appointment, the nomination of Matt Gaetz to be America's next Attorney General. Democrats, because they think that he is absolutely, completely unqualified for the role. I mean, he is a lawyer, but that's about it. But Republicans, because in large measure, they all loathe him. I mean, there is no more unpopular figure in the House of Representatives within the Republican Party than Matt Gaetz, because of the endless machinations that he's put the Republican caucus through in various challenges to now 2 successive speakers of the House of Representatives. So there's absolutely no love lost between Matt Gaetz and anyone else in elected office here in Washington, D.C. And of course, he's got that House Ethics Committee investigation hanging over him into alleged impropriety, alleged inappropriate conduct with a minor. There are also allegations that he watched pornography on the floor of the House of Representatives, and allegations concerning the possible misuse of campaign funds to pay personal bills. He resigned from Congress last night after Donald Trump sort of threw him the lifeline in the form of this nomination. But one of the reasons he did that was to hold up the outcome of that Ethics Committee investigation and the report that was about to be published. So it is very, very hard to see how Matt Gaetz and some of these other nominees stands any chance whatsoever of securing Senate confirmation. Remember that anyone who is going to sit in Donald Trump's cabinet, any U.S. ambassador nominated by Donald Trump, or any federal judge nominated by Donald Trump after he takes office, they all have to go through confirmation hearings unless Donald Trump can persuade the new leader of the Republicans in the Senate, Senator John Thune of South Dakota, to agree to recess appointments. If Senator Thune will agree to that, and it's a huge if, Matt Gaetz could become the next Attorney General of the United States through a recess appointment, and he could be sitting atop the Department of Justice for 2 years. But that is going to require John Thune giving a massive gift to President-elect Donald Trump. And it's a real loyalty test, all of this, for John Thune and other Republicans in the Senate who recoil at the idea of Matt Gaetz becoming Attorney General.
Simon, you couldn't have been clearer. I mean, the phrasing that you've used, you know, people having a good old laugh, you know, not having, well, zero support, pretty much. It's not looking too promising for Matt Gaetz, but why on earth would Donald Trump put him forward then?
Oh, because they're like-minded. I mean, because Matt Gaetz takes the view, as Donald Trump takes the view, that his legal woes, Matt Gaetz says exactly the same thing about his legal woes, they're all the result of a weaponized Department of Justice. And one of the reasons why Donald Trump is turning to Matt Gaetz is because if the president-elect, after he takes the oath of office on January the 20th of next year, if he wants to go ahead immediately with his promise to terminate the traditional independence of the Department of Justice, not the constitutionally guaranteed independence, because it isn't, it's simply traditional independence of the Department of Justice. To do that, then the president-elect needs a completely compliant Attorney General. And in Matt Gaetz, he's got that. They are also aligned in their viewpoint, their desire to use the Department of Justice to go after some of the people that have made their own lives miserable through the prosecutions and the investigations that have been launched against them. So for Donald Trump, Matt Gaetz is extremely useful, but only if he can find a way of putting him into that Attorney General position, which is, I would say at the moment, looking unlikely. But again, it depends on whether Senator Thune agrees to recess appointments or not.
Simon Marks in Washington, thank you. Now, London is bracing for significant changes to American policy on issues the UK is heavily invested in following the US election. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, welcomed President-elect Trump and said he looked forward to working with him. But there are uncertainties for the UK government as Donald Trump prepares his new administration. Stuart Smith has more from London.
President-elect Donald Trump has many times openly declared his love for tariffs as a preferred tool of geopolitics.
If China or some other country is behaving badly, we have things called tariffs that are so severe.
He's suggested those could be imposed at 10% on all imports to the US. In that scenario, Goldman Sachs expects the British economy would suffer a 0.7 percentage point hit to GDP growth. Being outside the European Union, however, a political bloc Donald Trump has been particularly critical of, could avoid even greater damage.
So one advantage for the UK being outside the EU trading zone is that if there is any significant tit-for-tat trade war between the EU and the United States, the UK should escape some, but not all of the effects of that. But the UK is still going to be closely affected by any generalised tariffs that the Trump administration might introduce, or indeed further protectionist measures that the US might take to restrict market access to US customers.
Politicians in London are worried enough, though, that they've hinted reciprocal tariffs are being considered, just in case.
You know, it's a trade relationship with the United States, and we will make, strong representations about the importance of free and open trade, not just between ourselves and the United States, but globally.
Britain may also come under pressure from Washington to concede on other areas important to a Trump White House. For example, on the UK government's attempts to have a more pragmatic approach to China, which might precede revived trade, or climate policy, on which the UK is trying hard to brand itself as a world leader. Another worry for London is whether Donald Trump will reduce support for Ukraine or push it into an unfavourable deal with Russia. London, like many European capitals, sees Ukrainian success against the Russian invasion as essential for European security more broadly. That also explains concerns in Britain about the new president lessening support for the NATO military alliance. And since the US election, the UK government's coming under increasing pressure domestically to set out when it will increase its own defence spending as a proportion of GDP. Perhaps the hardest part for officials here at the Foreign Ministry is they simply don't know yet what foreign policy Donald Trump is committed to, or what the famously transactional president will be willing to do deals on. Stuart Smith, Al Arabiya News, London.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent in London, Olly Barratt. Now, Olly, we were just hearing about Britain's reaction to the potential Trump tariffs, but the crisis in the Middle East is also a priority for the UK government. The British Defence Secretary, John Healey, has been discussing ceasefire efforts today. What do we know about that?
That's right. We know that John Healey, on his visits to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, has been stressing that progress towards a ceasefire in Gaza and in Lebanon is one of the key objectives of this trip. We're also told that it's broadly about meeting with key allies when it comes to defence cooperation as well. But the UK making it very clear that it's pressing in discussions on this trip from John Healey to try and move some progress towards a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. So a central part of the trip as briefed by the Ministry of Defence here in London.
Yeah, we've been hearing that Healey intended to reaffirm the UK's support for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as you mentioned. How much international influence, though, does he and the UK have on this matter?
I think it's fair to say that the UK has not been able to exert much influence so far in this sphere, in this realm, over the calls for a ceasefire. Now, that's partly because there are other more influential actors when it comes to these matters, the United States, just as one example. But the UK does feel that it has some diplomatic sway and can play an important role in these discussions with partners like Saudi Arabia, with partners like Turkey as well. Domestically, the UK government and the government before, led by the outgoing Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, came under significant pressure domestically from some quarters for not doing enough to push quickly enough for a ceasefire. Certainly, the UK government has always said that when it comes to a ceasefire, ensure that any plan would be linked to the release of Israeli hostages by Hamas. It also says that it would be linked to improving the in a humanitarian situation inside Gaza as well. So the UK has had limited success, it's fair to say, so far when it comes to pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza and in Lebanon latterly too, but wants to make sure that it does keep pushing. And as I say, it does feel it does have some ability diplomatically to exert some influence in trying to move that process forwards, although with no concrete results so far, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you, Olly. Barratt in London. Apologies for a bit of the sound there, but we'll move on. Thank you, Olly. Thanks. Now let's have a look at some other news making headlines around the world. A man who attempted to attack Brazil's Supreme Court in Brasilia last night is believed to have been killed from his own explosives. Police have named the suspect as Francisco Wanderlei Luiz, who had previously stood in council elections for the Liberal Party. His body was found outside the building after the explosions were detonated. No one else was hurt. Argentinian representatives have left COP29 early after being given orders to return by their president Javier Milei. The team left the Global Climate Change Summit in Azerbaijan just 3 days into the two-week event. Milei has previously called the climate crisis a social lie. In South Korea, 1 million students are currently sitting the Sunyung, an 8-hour university placement exam said to be the toughest in the world. During this time, planes are grounded, construction work is paused and car horns are silenced in order to give those taking part complete focus. It's a countrywide effort with shops open late and extra public transport introduced to reduce traffic congestion. And the Phoenix Police Department have released incredible body cam rescue footage of a man who had driving his vehicle into a pool. The officer smashed the sunroof of the submerged car to get to the man inside. He's now recovering in a hospital in Arizona. The Washington Post has reported today that a close aide of Benjamin Netanyahu has told Donald Trump that Israel would like to make Lebanon ceasefire deal in January as a gift to the incoming president. Trump had said repeatedly during the election campaign that he wants to bring to an end the wars in the Middle East and could be one of his first foreign policy wins when he assumes power. This comes as 6 Israeli soldiers were killed fighting Hezbollah in southern Lebanon last Wednesday, one of the deadliest single days for the IDF since the start of the operation. For more on this, I'm joined from our correspondent, Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Now, Giles, we've heard contradictory statements over the past few days regarding a ceasefire in Lebanon. Today, the Washington Post reports that Israeli officials are working to time any ceasefire deal as a gift for Donald Trump, officially assuming the presidency in January. Can you confirm the details on this?
So far, we just have this reporting from the Washington Post that the Israeli minister Ron Dermer met with Donald Trump as well as his son-in-law Jared Kushner at the Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida just last Sunday. According to these reports, they discussed a potential deal under which Hezbollah forces would pull back behind the Litani River, which is the northern part of the buffer zone that is policed by UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. And also part of this deal would be Israeli forces having the option to cross back into Lebanon. Freedom, it's described at, the freedom to do that if there are violations of this ceasefire deal. And finally, the sort of really interesting part of this reported deal is that Russia would also be involved. Russian forces in Syria policing arms or weapons, stopping weapons coming from Syria into Lebanon and then getting into the hands of Hezbollah.
So how accurate is the report of Israel's gift suggestions, and has there been reaction from the international community?
Really, this report has been met by a wall of silence in terms of the people who are mentioned in this story. You have Ron Dermer's office, the Israeli minister, saying that they simply discussed a wide range of issues on his recent trip to the US. The offices of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, as well as President-elect Trump, declining to comment on this story whatsoever. And also spokespeople for Jared Kushner, as well as the Russian Foreign Ministry, just not responding to requests for comment. I think one thing, though, that this story does do is it sparks this question, really, is in terms of what the Israeli government is doing, in terms of, is it running two tracks in terms of speaking to the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration about a potential ceasefire deal, or do some of these details kind of mix in between them?
Yeah, it's a bit confusing, isn't it, at the moment, Giles? The Foreign Ministry of the Palestinian Authority has suggested today that Israeli ministers have been outlining their ambition to fully and permanently annex the Israeli-occupied West Bank as a test of international reaction. Is this something the Israeli government is preparing to do?
Well, it's something that senior ministers within the government are openly talking about. Just a few days ago, we had the far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who also has settlements as part of his ministerial portfolio, saying that he had told his government department to prepare the necessary infrastructure for applying sovereignty to the West Bank. We have to stress, though, that other very senior members of this government have sort of not quite directly but indirectly pushed back against that. We had the foreign minister, Gideon Saar, saying in response to that there's been no decision taken about this. And of course, if the Israeli government were to move forward with anything along those lines that Smotrich is talking about, then there would be immediate international condemnation from places like the United Nations and the European Union.
Now, Giles, a Human Rights Watch report has accused Israel of crimes against humanity over its policy of forcing the displacement of people in Gaza. What's been the reaction to their accusations?
Yeah, this report is 154 pages. The kind of headline is that 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced. They say that makes up 90% of the population of Gaza. In this report, they talk about forced displacement being widespread, systematic, and part of state policy. Now, there has not been an immediate response to this report from Human Rights Watch by the Israeli government or indeed from the Israeli Defense Forces, but we have to say that in previous instances when they have been accused of this particular war crime, they have always said that they deny anything along those lines and that Israeli forces always stick to international law.
OK, we'll leave it there. Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much. Now let's have a look at some other news making headlines around the world. Security is being stepped up in Paris tonight as the city prepares for a football match between Israel and France. 4,000 police officers will be deployed to the capital. Dozens of arrests were made last Thursday following a match in Amsterdam involving Israeli team Maccabi Tel Aviv. Officials say the attacks on Israeli supporters were anti-Semitic, whilst Tel Aviv fans were accused of singing anti-Arab songs. Sticking with France, and former presidential candidate Marine Le Pen could be jailed for up to 5 years after being accused of embezzling EU funds. The far-right leader and Paris prosecutor could also face a 5-year ban from political office. She denies the charges. And the former president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, is set to visit Nova Scotia in Canada next week to deliver a speech at the Halifax International Security Forum. Tsai stepped down in May and has defiantly stood against China's military threat. She's exchanged economic and political conversations with Canada, despite the countries having no diplomatic ties. Ukraine's foreign ministry has denied the country is planning on building nuclear weapons as it continues its fight against Russia. It comes as reports claim President-elect Donald Trump could soon select a Ukrainian peace envoy to lead negotiations to end the war. For more analysis of what a second Trump administration means for Ukraine, I'm joined from Kyiv by Ukrainian MP for the European Solidarity Party, Oleksiy Goncharenko. Mr. Goncharenko, firstly, what were your thoughts upon seeing the news that Donald Trump had won the election?
It's the choice of American people, so I can only congratulate Mr. Trump and Republican Party for such a big success. He won election of president. Also, they won the Congress. And we're looking forward to work together with them because the United States of America are super important ally for Ukraine. But I think that Ukraine is also an important ally for the United States of America.
Now, Donald Trump has signalled his intention to end the war in Ukraine in one day. Would you agree that this is perhaps slightly ambitious, and how realistic were his comments?
Nobody in the world wants the end of the war more than Ukrainians, because we are suffering every day, we are dying every day. We are very exhausted by this war. So it's absolutely a good intention from the President Trump to end the war. The question is how to do this. That's very important. Also, it's very important to have real peace, not a ceasefire, because ceasefire is not something we're looking for, and I'm sure President Trump too. So there are many, many questions what exactly President Trump is going to do. Yes, there are news that he will soon appoint some envoy who will start some diplomatic activity in this direction. That's a good news, and we are looking forward to see who it will be and how this person will start to operate.
Yes. Now, President Zelensky had rebuffed this notion of a 24-hour peace deal, suggesting last week in Budapest that he wanted a fair deal. It'd be useful to understand what that fair deal would look like and what are some of the very firm red lines for Ukraine. So let's start off with the fair deal. What does that look like?
The fair deal for Ukraine is very clear. It's restoration of our territorial integrity. And it's important not just for Ukraine, for every country in the world, because it's about international order and international law. I don't think that somebody wants to live in the world where law doesn't mean nothing. That's all. And that's what will be if the territorial integrity of Ukraine will not be finally restored. So this is a fair peace. And also it should include security guarantees for our country, understanding that this attack from Russian Federation will not be repeated. That's how the fair deal from Ukrainian point of view looks like.
And what are the red lines for Ukraine?
I'm not the person who can speak on behalf of the whole Ukraine and on behalf of the president or the government. I can tell you what I think is a red line. As I told you, we will never accept the fact that occupied territories are Russian. That's a red line. We need security guarantees. This is a red line, because the Budapest Memorandum, which we had in 1994, just was a disaster for Ukraine. And we need real guarantees, not some papers like it happened, they were in Budapest 30 years ago. I just want to remind that Ukraine, for the first time in human history, voluntarily gave up nuclear weaponry, the third biggest arsenal in the world, in exchange for these papers, which in the end of the day appeared to be absolutely nothing. So we will never, we don't want this to happen again. So we need real security guarantees. The best way is membership of Ukraine in NATO.
You've been really clear about what those red lines are from your perspective. Do you think there's been a shift, therefore, in the thinking in Kyiv regarding a peace deal with Russia? Are both sides ready to commit to some kind of deal?
Again, I can speak here on behalf of myself only and what I see. We want to regain our territorial integrity. But the question is, by what means? Can we do it militarily? To do it militarily, we need full support of our allies, and first of all, of the United States of America. Is the United States of America ready to provide us with this support after election of Mr. Trump? What will be his policy? We just don't know for the moment. So it depends. What will be the policy of President Trump? Also, a lot of will depend from how his conversation with Putin will go. Because I'm sure that President Trump will try to make a deal with Putin. But how they see this deal, I think it's quite different. How Trump sees it and how Putin sees it is very different. And I think if their conversation and this attempt to make a deal with Putin, if it will show to Donald Trump that Putin is not a reliable partner, that he is just a crazy dictator with whom he can't make a deal, I think his attitude and his strategy towards Russia can change dramatically. And I think that Donald Trump is a kind of person who can make a very bold steps. To bomb Moscow, I think Donald Trump can do this. I'm not sure about other politicians in America or anybody else in the world, but I think Donald Trump potentially is ready. But will he do this? How he will act? I just don't know. And I don't want to show that I know. But I mean, a lot of will depend from how this conversation between Trump and Putin will go.
Well, none of us know, but Ukrainian MP for the European Solidarity Party, Oleksiy Goncharenko, thank you very much for talking to us on the programme. To Germany now, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz continues to fight for survival and keep himself in a job after being forced to call a snap election. Addressing Parliament, the German leader appealed to potential voters by promising to bring in child benefits and increase tax thresholds before the country goes to the polls in February. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Berlin for us and joins us now. Trent, Scholz has said Germans don't need to choose between security and prosperity. How's that gone down there?
Well, Chancellor Scholz was criticised by many in the opposition for that comment. Effectively, they said that the prosperity part doesn't come without the security to protect it. What they're talking about, of course, is Germany's continued support for Ukraine, particularly financially and militarily. We know right now there are some difficult discussions taking place because of the collapse of Olaf Scholz's government. So too has his legislative agenda collapsed, and that includes bills for further funding for Ukraine. He made a pretty impassioned statement there in the German Bundestag, effectively defending his legacy, but also calling for some of the opposition parties to try and support some of those social benefits that you mentioned through the parliament. The difficulty right now is he just no longer has a minority. He is a chancellor leading a minority government, and he needs that opposition support to get through those policies. But from what we are seeing, the opposition certainly is not wanting to play ball. The opposition leader said that his MPs are not substitute players for the collapse of Olaf Scholz's government.
Now, it's a really interesting situation in Germany in terms of public sentiment as the far-right party, for example, the AfD, managed to claim a substantial number of seats in 2017, lost a few now, but they're still the fifth largest party in the country. Has Trump's recent win, do you think, reinvigorated those inclined to vote for the right?
Well, look, I think it's certainly put the wind in their sails. I mean, the AfD leadership were quick out of the gates to congratulate President-elect Donald Trump, releasing a statement saying that just like Germans, US citizens have had enough of national debt, economic decline, endless wars and illegal immigration. They certainly think the types of messages that President Trump deployed on his campaign could be a winning message here. We know the AfD is polling quite well. They're currently second in the polls behind the main conservative CDU party, and they have done quite well at the ballot box in recent months in 3 state elections, even winning one state, the state of Thuringia. So right now their support is quite concentrated in those areas which form the part of East Germany, the former communist East. Can they extend that lead into other parts of the country? That's the big unknown right now. But what we do know is that all of the mainstream parties, including the Conservatives, have said that they just will not work with the AfD to try and form a coalition, effectively an agreement between the parties to build a firewall to ensure that the far right doesn't form government here in any way in Germany.
It'd be interesting to see what happens. Trent, currently the polls are not in Scholz's favour. Is there any chance of a comeback?
I think it will be very difficult. I mean, right now, the smart money in Berlin certainly seems to be banking on the opposition leader, Friedrich Merz, winning that snap election in February. We know that he is currently leading by about 20 points ahead of Olaf Scholz's SPD. And I think staring at some of those numbers and the possibility of being thrust into electoral oblivion, I should say, we know there is some disquiet inside the SPD party right now, even conversations happening about maybe changing the leader. Right now, Olaf Scholz, though, is hanging on, but some of his own MPs have now gone public saying that they should substitute him with the highly popular Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius. For the time being, the Defence Minister says he is not running.
Trent Murray in Berlin, thank you for talking to us. Thank you. Let's have a look at some of the top business news now. British consumer rights company Which is suing Apple for around £3 billion for the way they charge customers for its iCloud storage. The lawsuit claims Apple has breached UK competition law and accused them of trapping users with Apple devices into signing up for it. If successful, 40 million Apple customers may receive a payout. In addition, the European Commission has fined Facebook's parent company Meta $841 million for breaching EU competition law benefiting Facebook Marketplace. The EU has accused Meta of abusing its dominant market position on social media networks and in online advertising. UK fashion label Burberry plans on using its British heritage to claw back customers. The luxury firm will concentrate on its classic trench coats and scarves rather than bags and shoes in an attempt to ramp up revenue. The company's new CEO, Joshua Schulman, revealed his plans to turn around the brand with a £40 million cost savings programme after reporting a loss for the first half of the financial year. To sports news now, and social media star Jake Paul is gearing up for his Friday night fight with boxing legend Mike Tyson. The 27-year-old is 30 years younger than Iron Mike, who's returning to the ring after 19 years. And ex-footballer Diego Forlan's professional tennis debut has ended in disappointment on the ATP Challenger Tour. The former Manchester United and Atletico Madrid striker and his doubles partner Federico Coria lost 6-1, 6-2 to Bolivian pair Boris Arias and Federico Zeballos during a 47-minute-long match. And in showbiz news tonight, fashion and entertainment collided in Saudi Arabia's capital for an unforgettable event. The 1001 Seasons of Elisar, part of Riyadh season 2024, showcased 300 stunning gowns by the legendary Lebanese designer who's celebrating 45 years in fashion. Stars like Celine Dion, Jennifer Lopez and Monica Bellucci lit up the night in tribute to the tales of 1001 nights. Saudi Arabia's General Entertainment Authority Chairman Turki Al Sheikh told Al Arabiya how he initiated the idea for this event to Eli Saab and his son in London, adding that he's proud Arab like Saab has achieved such remarkable success in the fashion world.
I hope that the event will meet your expectations. This is the effort of Eli Saab and his son Eli Jr. They are Arab designers whom we are proud of. Eli's beginning was in Riyadh in 1982, and today he returns to Riyadh with the 1001 Nights, and hopefully you will see surprises. Entertainment includes everything in society. I am now discussing with Eli Jr. next year's event. It happened during a meeting in London between us, and at the beginning they didn't believe the idea, but day after day the idea was developed. Honestly, I am proud that an Arab person has reached this place.
Let's have a reminder of our top stories. Donald Trump's latest White House appointment sends shockwaves through Washington as controversial Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is chosen as Attorney General. British Defence Secretary John Healey travels to Turkey and Saudi Arabia to discuss ceasefire possibilities in the Middle East. And Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly proposed a Lebanon ceasefire deal in January as a so-called gift to Donald Trump. That's all from us at W News. Coming up next is Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.